Nearly 30 years, one mask has been the face of the horror genre, the Ghostface mask. Behind the Ghostface mask, there have been 12 different killers, 12 different motives, 12 different levels of chaos. From Scream 1 through Scream 6, everyone who has worn the Ghostface mask has thought that they were the smartest person in the room. Today, we will be discussing all 12 ghost faces and telling you what their biggest weakness is. Let's begin. So welcome to Fright Brothers. So let's go ahead and begin our discussion today of the 12 different ghost faces. Ryan, let's start off with Wayne Bailey, Detective Wayne Bailey. Tell me about him and give me his biggest weakness as Ghostface.
So those of you out there know that we did one of our last videos on the biggest flaws of or biggest mistakes of each Scream movie. And what really carried down Scream 6 was Detective Wayne Bailey. And the reason why I think that he carried the movie down as a ghost face was because he did a lot of things smart at times, and then he did some stupid things. And one thing that really bothers me with Detective Wayne Bailey was in the third act of Scream 6, this guy has a loaded firearm. He has Sam Carpenter basically in his sights. And you know what he does? Detective Bailey decides to charge at her with a weapon, loaded firearm, when he could have used that firearm. And that made absolutely no sense to me. But yet we have this guy designing all these Ghostface shrines, retrieving evidence from different Ghostface crime scenes from the previous Scream movies. So that is my biggest issue with Detective Wayne Bailey, is he conveniently is intelligent at times, but then when the intelligence is tested in the third act, it seems to go out the door. So that is my biggest flaw that I have with Detective Wayne Bailey. Kevin, what is your biggest flaw?
So Detective Bailey's biggest flaw is his lack of disguise. See, when we think of predators, especially like the lion, we see them in the Sahara. They go and they don't just pounce on their prey, just brute force. What they do is they hide in the long grasses, tall brown and blonde grasses that are yellow and stuff like that, which matches their fur. And they subtly get closer, and their prey doesn't know this until they, boom, attack and take out the gazelle, the prey. That is something that Detective Bailey lacked. Now, one might say that, wait a minute, Kevin, Detective Bailey did have disguise because he used his position as a detective with the NYPD to be able to take on the role of Ghostface. But I submit to you that the problem with him was that he was so immersed in every single scene that we were seeing with Sam and Tara and the Core 4 and all of that. He was the only real detective that we were seeing that was a part of the investigation. We didn't see any other detective a part of the investigation, which stands to reason he really did not have a disguise. And because he did not have a disguise, it was evident as soon as he stepped foot on scene and was questioning our new Core 4 that he was Ghostface. And so it left the third act of this movie with a lack of surprise, which the Ghostface should be a surprise. And for this reason, his lack of disguise, his lack of subtlety is Detective Bailey's biggest flaw. Moving on to Ethan Landry. Ryan, what is his biggest mistake?
So Ethan Landry is in Sam and Tara's friend group. But Ethan is not really a player in that group. Ethan is the most quiet individual. He's not there when any of the conflict happens in Scream 6. He seems to conveniently be gone.
Where were you? When? Last night. I had econ, you know.
And it's just too convenient that Ethan is supposedly supposed to be one of their friends, but whenever they need him the most, he's not there. That's the problem. So his biggest flaw is that he's not really a real friend. That is his biggest flaw. Ethan is not a true friend. When we get his reveal in Scream 6, it's not earned. Ethan has not earned a good Ghostface reveal, and I would say that is his biggest weakness because he's not a real friend. And the reason that I can back this up is if you go back and look at Scream 1996, you see Stu Macher's character is flashing all over the screen from Act 1 to Act 3. And you really feel like Stu Macher is a true friend. He's crazy, I get it. He's a little unhinged, but he's there during the Randy's party sequence in the third act. He's there throughout most of the film. He gives dialogue.
Listen, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel.
You feel like he's in the friend group and he's a true friend. So the problem with Ethan I have, and the biggest flaw, is that Ethan is not a true friend. That is his issue. He's just a silent killer. That's exactly what he is. Kevin, what is your biggest flaw with Ethan Landry?
So Ethan Landry's biggest flaw is the fact that he lacks charisma. See, in order to be a great Ghostface, you must be able to have the disguise of charisma. See, a lot of people will assume that you are the Ghostface killer if you lack charisma, because it is a telltale sign, as Ryan was talking about. You're in a friend group, but you're not really hanging out with them. You're in a friend group, but you're not really talking to them. You're in a friend group, but when the kills happen, you pop on scene after the fact. That makes people suspicious. But if you have charisma, you're not suspicious. You're actually someone who's lovable, likable, easily to get along with, and that makes you dangerous. This is something that Ethan Landry lacks. Basically, we go through acts 1 and 2 with little to no interactions or scenes where Ethan Landry is captivating at all. In fact, he seems to be the token character, the token friend, the add-along friend that they just were looking for an extra to be a part of the film to fulfill a space, not to actually be a character, but to fill a space. And so when we see that Ethan is a Ghostface in Act 3 of Scream 6, it is not a surprise. Because of his lack of personality, he is so obviously Ghostface. And that is the problem, his lack of charisma. Moving on to Quinn Bailey in Scream 6. Ryan, what is her biggest mistake?
Now, this one is a real easy one right here. This is one of the easiest ones. The biggest flaw with Quinn Bailey is that Quinn is not strong enough to be Ghostface. It's not believable. And like I said in that video, the biggest mistake that every Scream movie makes, we see through the plot that Quinn is supposedly the Ghostface that throws Gail's boyfriend through that glass coffee table in that New York penthouse. So you mean to tell me that this girl that's probably about 5'6", maybe, I don't know how much she weighs, but that doesn't really matter as much. 5'6", throws this big grown man that's probably 6'3", 250 pounds through a coffee table was nothing? No. So that is her biggest flaw. She's got other flaws, some similar to Ethan too, as in she's usually not there, but I get she faked her death during the second to third act of Scream 6. But the main thing is she's just not physically equipped to be a Ghostface. So that is my biggest flaw with Quinn Bailey. Kevin, what is yours?
So the biggest flaw of Quinn Bailey is the fact that her physicality does not match up with that of Ghostface. As Ryan mentioned there, she is the one who has been claimed to be the killer of Gail's boyfriend. If you recall, Gail's boyfriend was over 6 foot tall, muscle-bound man, and really strong. And so is it believable that someone who is 6 inches shorter and not so physically strong or intimidating can throw a 250-pound man through glass across an entire penthouse apartment? It's unbelievable. And then when we have the scene where we have the two Ghostfaces try to take out the character that we have there with one of the brother of the Meeks twins. And so there he's kissing Tara, and then all of a sudden we see two Ghostfaces that are the same height. And we're supposed to believe that one of them is Quinn Bailey and that the other is her brother who is there, and that we know that her brother is over 6 foot tall and their heights are the same level. It's unbelievable. So the dissonance, the difference between her physicality and the physicality of Ghostface is her biggest flaw as Ghostface. So moving on to Scream 5, we will go ahead and discuss Richie Kirsch. So Ryan, what is Richie Kirsch's biggest weakness in this film?
So those of you out there, if y'all have been watching us by now, you should know that we don't like this movie, Scream 5. We feel that Scream 5 is basically a carbon copy of Scream 1. So this video is focused though on Richie. So how does Scream 1 tie into Scream 5 with Richie? Well, Richie is not a memorable Ghostface. Richie tries to be Billy Loomis. He tries to be obsessed with horror movies and tries to fit into this friend group. But as Kevin said with one of the previous Ghostfaces on this list, Ethan Landry, I'm gonna say the same thing with Richie. Richie lacks charisma. Richie is not memorable. He also has some of the same weaknesses that Ethan has outside of just charisma. And one of them also being that Richie does not show up whenever there's conflict happening. If you notice in Scream 5, Richie is not a good boyfriend. Richie is very bland. He's not memorable, very bland character. And his biggest flaw, though, because that's the title of this video, is that Richie lacks charisma. Richie tries to go 0 from 100 in Scream 5 in the third act, and it doesn't resonate, guys. I'm sorry, but you can't tell me that this guy, that Sam's boyfriend, is supposedly supposed to be this loving guy for Sam, but yet throughout the movie, he's not there. I believe there's a scene where he tells Tara and Sam, whenever they're trying to get her inhaler, he's like, no, we need to just leave the inhaler at home. And they're also trying to get out of Woodsboro, and he's telling them, no, don't leave Woodsboro. So my biggest issue that we have with Richie is that Richie lacks charisma. Kevin, what is your biggest flaw with Richie?
So a lot of times we have actors in this movie, Scream 5. A lot of these newer actors are the children of famous actors. And so the actor who plays Richie Kirsch, Jack Quaid, is exactly that. So both of his parents are famous actors. And so you think, well, you have famous parents as actors, then you are a great actor. Unfortunately, his performance left me wanting for here. And the reason why I say that is because it was just dull. It was bland. He didn't really take over any scene that we saw. In fact, he was very forgettable. It felt as though anyone could swap out with him as the actor playing the Richie Kirsch role and be at least as good as him, or perhaps more believable and more likable. What makes Ghostface great, when the Ghostface performance is done well, is the likability of the friend, the person who's playing Ghostface. Without the likability, we don't have likability here for him. It leaves us like, I just want to go to sleep. And that's the way I felt throughout seeing him on scene, that I wanted to just doze off or skip and get to the next scene because his performance was not vivacious at all. And so his biggest weakness, the biggest flaw for him, is his lack of ability. Moving on to Amber Freeman. Ryan, what is her biggest flaw?
So Amber's biggest flaw is that she's basically a generic version of Stu Macher. That's exactly what Amber is. You even see her in the third act spitting, foaming at the mouth like Stu Macher did in the third act of Scream 96. Amber tries to go from 0 to 100 and tries to put on the Stu Macher persona, but the issue is that she's going from 0 to 100 in a snap of a finger. That's the problem. If you notice, Stu never went from 0 to 100. He was already at 100 the whole film. Amber looks completely normal, completely sane from act 1 up until Act 2. And then as soon as we get to Act 2, it's like turning on a light switch and we get crazy Amber. So that is my biggest flaw with Amber Freeman as a Ghostface. Kevin, what is your biggest flaw with Amber Freeman?
So my biggest flaw for Amber Freeman is her physicality. Like I said, the actress who plays Amber Freeman is a star actress. She's already won awards for her performances in other movies and things of that nature. She's already won an Academy Award at the age of 26, one of the youngest to win Best Actress. So I tip my hat off to you, Mickey Madison. However, you are not suited for the role of Ghostface. We see in here that in the scene that we've talked about and we've talked about before, I'll tell you, the scene in the hospital where we have our beloved Dewey get out of the elevator to chase down Ghostface to take out Ghostface. And we are to believe that this is Amber playing Ghostface at 5'10", 5'11", eye level with Dewey, who we know the actor is 5'10". When we do know that the actress who plays Amber is 5'3". That is hard to believe. And it's not her fault that the physicality is not there, but it's just not a good fit to have Mickey Madison in this role playing Ghostface, or at least in this particular scene, swap him out and have Jack Quaid's character, Richie Kirsch, be the one who takes out Dewey. That's more plausible. But the fact that Radio Silence goes with her, Amber Freeman, being Ghostface in the scene, growing 6 inches, 7 inches of height in order to take out Ghostface is unbelievable. And it doesn't fit what we know Scream has been and will be. So Ryan, moving on to Scream 4, 2011, we'll go with Charlie Walker. What is his biggest flaw?
So Charlie is a terrible Ghostface, but the title of this video is the biggest flaw of each Ghostface. So Charlie's problem is that Charlie is a yes man. Charlie answers to Jill throughout this entire movie, and Charlie is not able to do anything on his own. That's the biggest problem I have with this guy. He's a yes man. He's a puppy. He's like one of those eager puppies that is just staring at you with the puppy dog eyes. And that's sort of similar to Stu somewhat, but Stu was more unhinged. So Charlie is completely sane. The issue is that he's a yes man. He does whatever Jill tells him to do, and that's his biggest flaw. Kevin, what is your biggest flaw with Charlie Walker?
So the biggest flaw of Charlie Walker, well, we can think of a few flaws that he has. One could be the physicality. Is it believable that him at 5'6" is playing Ghostface? That can be a flaw. We could think of another flaw of his lack of charisma. There's no likability to this character whatsoever throughout Scream 4. But the biggest flaw, I submit to you, of Charlie Walker is the fact that Charlie Walker is a passive man. So when you think of things, we think of the Family Guy and the joke of the father being the butt of the joke, and because he's passive and everybody seems to know what's going action. Even his children are assertive and assert their will over him. We see this in other types of shows there. We've seen it in the Stranger Things there as well, where you have the passive father role there as well, played by Mike's father. And we see this all throughout cinema, and we land on this here. And so the passive male stereotype is the one that we have with Charlie Walker. But you may say to me, well, he was the one that was behind most of the killings. He was the one doing most of them. But as Ryan mentioned, he did those because of Jill. And the fact that he was so stupid to believe that Jill would want a relationship with him if he takes out these people is baffling to me. So it shows that he has no shrewdness, no forethought, no understanding. He's just a passive, almost like zombie character, just taking people out. And for that reason, that is his biggest flaw. Moving on to Jill Roberts. What is her biggest flaw, Ryan?
So Jill Roberts is actually one of my favorite ghost faces, but there is an issue with Jill's character as Ghostface. And the main thing that's wrong with Jill is the physicality side of the equation. So if we were to take Jill's character and put her into a body, maybe a UFC fighter or somebody like Ronda Rousey, and made her 5'11", then Jill would be one of the best Ghostfaces on this list. But she's only 5'2". The actress that plays her, Emma Roberts, very great actress, but 5'2" as Ghostface. And apparently, did y'all know that she is the Ghostface that took out the two cops in the second act of Scream 4? The scene where you had Anthony Anderson's character get stabbed in the head, and I believe it was Adam Brody got stabbed in the back. That was Jill that did that. So it was like, that's not really believable that Jill just took out those two cops that quick like that at 5'2". So her biggest weakness in my books is going to be the physical side. Kevin, what is Jill's biggest weakness?
So Jill's biggest flaw is her jealousy. So I could say that her biggest flaw is her physicality at 5'2", when Ghostface is typically around or close to 5'11", 5'10". I could say her biggest flaw is the fact that Emma Roberts seems to do the same mean girl performance in every single movie and TV show that she's been in. I've seen her do the same performance in American Horror Story, and I saw it again here in this film. But I submit to you that her biggest flaw is jealousy. She wants too much. As you know, the famous saying for her is, I don't need friends, I need fans.
I don't need friends, I need fans.
And as we know, in today's society, so many people are trying to establish a YouTube career, a social media career. So many people don't want to work real jobs. They just want to pursue social media as their way of making money full time. The problem with that is that people want too much and offer too little. Here, Jill fell because she offered too little and she wanted too much. She wants to be the person who is the most famous person, who is more famous than Sydney, but she is unwilling and unable to make the sacrifices that Sydney Prescott did that make her famous. She wants that same famousness without the sacrifice. And you can see that as she is trying to hurt herself to fool the police and fool everyone, including Dewey, that she was not the Ghostface killer. But we see in the hospital scene that comes back to haunt her because, again, her jealousy of Sydney Prescott, her pursuit of wanting fame is what cost her in the end. And as a result, it is biggest weakness. So moving on to Scream 3, Roman Bridger. Ryan, what is his biggest flaw?
So Roman Bridger is an outlier on this list of Ghostfaces. Why? Because he's the only Ghostface in Scream 3. So Roman is almost too perfect of a Ghostface. He has the highest number of kills of any Ghostface on this list, and the solo Ghostface of Scream 3. The biggest issue is that you can't be that perfect, or I guess he's too perfect. That's the biggest issue. You can't be that perfect, guys. He's directing a stab movie and he's carrying out all these kills, and he has knowledge of freaking medicine. He's able to use drugs to deviate people into thinking he's dead. His issue is he's too good. The writing is just too convenient with Roman. It does not make sense. You can't be in two places at one time. You can't do all of this stuff this good, and no one suspects him until the third act at all. Nobody does. So my thing with Roman is his biggest issue is he's too perfect. Kevin, what is your biggest issue with Roman Bridger?
So Roman Bridger's biggest flaw is his affluenza. So as many of us know, the term affluenza is basically someone who grew up in a wealthy, well-to-do home with two-parent household, and they don't hold themselves accountable for anything. In fact, they feel like they're the victim, even though they grew up in a multi-million-dollar estate with everything they could ever want. And we've seen that in recent news in Hollywood, where You have someone, child, that does an atrocious act allegedly to a parent or parents allegedly. And so this situation is a reminder of how prominent affluenza is in society. You have Roman Bridger, the son of a filmmaker and actress, who's playing the victim game, blaming his sister for everything, his half-sister, Sidney Prescott, for everything, blaming his mother and the circumstances of what she went through. And we know throughout the movie that it appears as though Maureen Prescott went through horrible circumstances that led to the birth of Roman Bridger. Instead of having empathy for his late mother, he has disdain for his sister, who's done nothing to him. And he plays the victim all throughout the movie up into the very last moment before Dewey takes him out. And so it is Roman Bridger's influenza that is his biggest flaw. So let's go ahead and move on to Scream 2, 1997. Mickey Altieri. So Ryan, what is Mickey's biggest flaw?
So Mickey's biggest flaw is that his motive simply does not make sense to me. Mickey got his college tuition paid for him by Mrs. Loomis, another Ghostface on our list. And Mickey goes on a killing spree at Sydney's college. So the movie says his motive, or the character says the motive in the movie, is that he just wanted to be famous and wanted to blame everything on the movies when he gets his trial. And that's when we got that line where Mrs. Loomis said, "Dear Mickey, there's not gonna be a trial." And then she kills him.
Not gonna be a trial.
So his biggest issue is the motive. His motive makes no sense at all to me. And I need someone to help me understand, because I don't understand his motive. Just because he wanted a trial and wanted to be famous. There's other ways to get famous without having a trial. But I would say that is Mickey's flaw, or biggest flaw. Kevin, what do you think Mickey's biggest flaw is?
The biggest flaw of Mickey is that he does not take advantage of his gifts. So we see here that Mickey is a person who can go toe to toe with Randy Meeks in a film classroom. Randy Meeks says, "Hey, the original's always better than the sequel." But we have here Mickey say, "Hey, actually the sequel's better than the original." And he takes that argument, which is the more challenging argument to make, and he gives us some solid evidence with Terminator 2 and some solid evidence there with Godfather Part 2. And so this shows how he's witty, he's able to go toe to toe, but he blows that away because he decides to take on the Ghostface mask because Mrs. Loomis is looking for someone to do so. You have your whole future ahead of you. You could be a great director in film. You could be a great professor and get a PhD in film and teach at a university for the rest of your life. You could have done so many other things, even if it wasn't film related, but you chose in exchange for tuition payments to take out all of these people, and which leads to your demise. That is your biggest flaw, not taking advantage of your gifts. So with that stated, let's move to Mrs. Loomis. Ryan, what is Nancy Loomis's biggest flaw?
So Mrs. Loomis, I think, is actually, I would say she's the best female Ghostface, but her biggest flaw is that she's inefficient. And I want you all to tell me how this makes sense. Sydney killed Billy Loomis, her son, back in Woodsboro, California in 1996. The events of Scream 2 take place based on the story in 1998. And I know the film came out in 1997, but the events are supposed to take place in 1998. So Sydney goes from Woodsboro to her college in Ohio, and Mrs. Loomis pays Mickey's tuition for him to assist her in taking out Sydney. Along with paying his tuition, she travels to Ohio 2 years after the events of Scream 1, just to get to Ohio and kill the person she paid tuition. This makes no sense. She kills him and then finally sets her eyes on Sydney and then ends up getting killed herself. But you get where I'm going at. her biggest mistake or biggest flaw is that she's inefficient. This makes no sense. Regular people, even people that are crazy, don't behave like that. That just doesn't make any sense. So that is what I have as Mrs. Loomis's biggest flaw. Kevin, what is her biggest flaw?
So the biggest flaw for Mrs. Loomis is not her motive. She has an airtight motive. She wants to avenge the loss of her son. Her biggest flaw is the fact that she insists on ignoring reality. What do I mean by this? Well, she sees Billy Loomis, her late son, as a hero, as a victim to Sidney Prescott. She never takes the time to think of her son as a serial killer. I don't know about you, but I've seen a few YouTube videos in courtroom cases where you have someone being sentenced because they have been convicted of murder to prison for sometimes life, sometimes more than just a life sentence. And once in a while, I'll see a relative, usually a mother, come up or indicate my son is innocent in her statements there during the sentencing hearing, and try to say that her son didn't mean wrong and her son didn't do anything, and her son, when it's clear and obvious and has been determined by a jury of the murderer's peers that he is a convicted murderer. So we see that, and I don't know if you've seen that, but I've seen that, and I thought of Mrs. Loomis. And where does that come from? This failure to admit to reality that the son that you birth is the serial killer. He is the person that's taken many lives. And because he did so, his life was taken. And so that is her biggest flaw, that she's willing to go through all these hurdles to end other people's lives on the lie that her son was innocent. So I submit to you, Mrs. Loomis' biggest flaw is her failure to acknowledge the reality that her beloved son is a serial killer. So moving on to Scream 1996. And speaking of Billy Loomis, Ryan, what is Billy Loomis's biggest flaw?
So we say the best for last. Now, this is going to upset some people because we know that there are some huge Billy Loomis fans and some huge Stu Macher fans out there. But right now I'm going to talk about Billy. So my biggest flaw with Billy that I have is that Billy's motive does not make sense. And I'm going to say it again. It doesn't make sense, guys. And here's why. He wants to kill Sidney Prescott because her mother had an affair with his dad, which ended up breaking up his parents' relationship. So my question is, how does Sidney have anything to do with that, guys? How does Sidney have anything to do with what her mother does? That's her mother. That's not Sidney. So his biggest flaw is that his motive does not make sense. And I'm not saying Billy is not the best Ghostface, because this video is not a ranking video. We're listing flaws. So this is my biggest flaw with Billy Loomis, and it is that his motive does not make sense. Kevin, what is your biggest flaw with Billy Loomis, or what is his biggest flaw?
So for Billy Loomis, I could say that his biggest flaw is him being a bad boy. And I could talk about how being a bad boy is a terrible thing. You should be a nice guy. But that's an argument that I will not dive into. What I will say is Billy Loomis's biggest flaw is that he is selfish. So when we look at Scream 1996, Billy in every scene is all about Billy. We look at the scene where we see the core group of 5, where Randy Meeks and Stu Macher and all the others are there. And we see Billy Loomis with Sidney Prescott there as well. And the thing is, Billy is not engaged with his friends. He's not even engaged and had conversation with his girlfriend. He's just stoic and I is sitting there with him, but his mind is focused on himself. We see that in scenes at the high school where Sidney confronts Billy and how Billy gaslights Sidney. And we see that he gaslights her because guess what? He's selfish. We even see the scene in Act 3 where he reveals himself, and so does Stu Macher reveal themselves as Ghostface. And It just seems as though he wants total control by telling Stu, give me the knife back, when they try to go ahead and cause harm to themselves to a certain degree to pretend like they are victims of the Ghostface killings. The fact that he's doing all this in every single scene has to be the person, even when Randy Meeks points out the possibility in the Blockbuster type store that Billy Loomis might be Ghostface because he's kind of selfish. He just stares and tries to confront Randy as if Randy has done something wrong, which he actually was 100% right. So we see this selfishness from this character that pervades the entire movie, and it causes him to meet his demise of being killed off in Scream 1996. And so I submit to you, Billy Loomis's biggest flaw is the fact that he is selfish from Act 1 all the way through Act 3. So moving to our last and final, Ghostface. Ryan, what is Stu Macher's biggest flaw?
So there is smart crazy and then there's dumb crazy. Billy and Stu are both crazy, guys. Both of them are psychopaths, but Billy's more calculated. Stu is less calculated. So Stu's biggest flaw is just lack of intelligence, in my opinion. And here we go with another pawn. All Stu is Billy's pawn. He does what Billy says. Billy has to reel him in because Stu is completely unhinged, especially when you get to the third act. You'll have those scenes where you have Sydney, you have Billy, and then you have Stu at Stu's house, and they're having the reveal. And then you see Billy talking to Stu, trying to reel him back in because he knows that Stu is starting to get out of focus from what the game plan is that they've agreed upon. So Stu's biggest flaw is his lack of intelligence. And then even in that third act, you have him saying dialogue or have him saying things, forget the exact line, but he's like, oh, my parents are gonna be so mad.
You really call the police?
You bet your sorry ass I
My mom and dad are gonna be so mad.
And he's like, he's thinking about what his parents are gonna do. And this guy has been out here killing folks for the past few days. He's more worried about his parents now than he should have been worried about them well before then. So that is that is his biggest flaw. He's not very intelligent, because an intelligent person would think before they act. Stu does not think before he acts. Billy thinks before he acts, but Stu does not. So Stu's biggest flaw is his lack of intelligence. Kevin, what is Stu's biggest flaw?
So Stu's biggest flaw is desire to be liked. So we see this play out throughout the whole entire Scream 1996, where Stu is being over the top. He's talking and he's laughing and he's trying to be the show of the party, and every scene he's playing it 100%. So essentially, he's being the court jester, the person that the king brings out to the court to play the fool for entertainment purposes only. And we get that performance with Stu Macher. We see him laughing. We see him over the top, yelling, even when there's no need to, at the Blockbuster, talking to Randy, screaming at the top of his lungs, laughing and howling and cackling there. We see that even in the closing of the movie in Act 3, where the reveal of Stu Macher and Billy Loomis as Ghostface is done, and he's still screaming and laughing and yelling and coming unhinged to foaming at the mouth as he has his friend stab him and give him wounds that could be fatal and leave him to his demise. And so the fact that he wants to be liked, he wants Billy Loomis to love him and to like him, he wants everybody to invites everybody over to his party in order for everyone to think of how cool he is as a person, to have everyone invited to his home. Hey, I know that feeling. I remember one time having a birthday party in my early 20s at an apartment, invited so many people over, and realized after the birthday party that very few people actually bought me gifts. So it stood to reason that I was trying to be liked by people who didn't really care for me. In the same way, this is Stu Macher's weakness in this particular film. And it's the reason why he ends up dying and meeting his demise as Ghostface. And so I submit that to you. His biggest weakness is he is a people pleaser. So that is the end of our particular video on the Ghostfaces. So Ryan, what are we working on?
So we're working on getting more Scream content. So one of them being what every Scream movie gets right, which is opposite of every Scream movie's biggest mistake. So we're working on getting that content out to you all before the release of the great Scream 7, or supposedly, hopefully great, I should say, Scream 7 at the end of this month.
And remember, Fright Fam, be watchful!